Wonderful. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us to this incredible new opportunity to elevate English learners. My name is Magali Lavadens, and on behalf of my colleagues at the Center for Equity for English Learners at Loyola Marymount University, we are more than thrilled to welcome you to this webinar. SEAL focuses on research policy and practice to really transform educational systems to improve the outcomes for English and multilingual learners. And it is in our partnership with Californians Together that our colleagues have been working on this webinar to bring you the most current and cutting edge information around elevating integrated English language development in mathematics instruction for multilingual and English learners. This topic, this content area is of statewide, local, and national importance. Throughout the country, we know that access to equitable instruction in mathematics for English learners has been lagging, and we have a renewed opportunity in and through this groundbreaking California mathematics framework to be able to reverse those trends, to be able to bring access and equity for English learners through many of the voices and experiences and practices. The framework has robust and rigorous ideas, and you're going to hear about how to translate those ideas through many of our participants in this webinar this afternoon. You're going to be able to hear from our colleagues Manuel Buenrostro from Californians Together and Veronica Torres McLean from the Center for Equity for English Learners, who are going to center us and ground us in the idea of the mathematics instruction through the framework, concepts, and practices. And then you're going to be able to hear also from expert teacher leaders. And our teacher leaders will be from a variety of districts throughout the state, including Los Angeles Unified School District, Hueneme Elementary School District, expert district leaders from Delhi Unified School Districts, and the San Leandro Unified School Districts, as well as the English Learner Success Forum. But before we start with our panelists, I have the pleasure of introducing you to Californians Together Executive Director Marta Hernandez.
Thank you, Magali, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Again, I am Marta Hernandez, Executive Director of Californians Together. We are a coalition focused on championing English learner success. This session, as Magali mentioned, reflects the ongoing collaboration between the Center for Equity for English Learners at Loyola Marymount University and Californians Together. Our two organizations are deeply committed to ensuring educational equity for multilingual and English learners through advocacy and policy. We are proud of our long-standing partnership, most recently highlighted through our involvement in the High Quality Instructional Materials Learning Partners Coalition. That's a mouthful, which we co-lead with Education Trust West. In addition to SEAL, the Center for Equity for English Learners, and at Trust West, our partners in the coalition include the English Learner Success Forum, Partnership for Los Angeles Schools, San Joaquin County Office of Education, and Unbound Ed. The coalition focuses on supporting the implementation of the 2023 math framework in a way that fully meets the needs of all of California's students, and that includes our English learners. Today, we aim to address the urgent need to focus on integrated English language development in mathematics. We all understand that we share a collective responsibility for English learners and that all educators are, in fact, teachers of language. We would also like to acknowledge the Gates Foundation for their incredible support, particularly Max Espinosa for his vision of equity and access to high quality, robust mathematics instruction for our English learners. We have an impressive registration turnout today with over 81 districts and organizations represented, spanning all grade levels and more than 76 roles. Thank you again for your commitment to this important work, and I will hand it off to, I believe, Manuel Bunrostro, Director of Policy for Californians Together.
Thank you, Marta. And I'm excited to provide the context today about why the framework is so important for us and why it matters, alongside Veronica Torres McLean from the LMU Center for Equity for English Learners. Now, a few notes about the logistics for today. This meeting is being recorded, and this is going to allow us to share the recording as well as a PowerPoint with folks that might not be able to join us today, as well as for us to be able to share it with any of you that want to access the content afterwards. There will be also no formal time for Q&A for this meeting, but questions will be monitored in the chat, and we will do our best to answer your questions as they're placed in the chat. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them. And if we can't answer them, we'll get back to you at a later time. We will also be sharing resources and opportunities for how each of you can engage and continue the conversation during the end of the webinar. So stay tuned. Now, let's start with a quick poll to see how familiar we might be with the 2023 math framework. So in the chat, please share on a scale of 1 to 5 your level of familiarity with the math framework. So a number 1 would indicate that you have never heard of it. What is this framework? A 3 might indicate that you have read a section or 2 of it. And then a 5 means that you have read through it from cover to cover, and you are an expert in the framework. So please take a few seconds and let us know where you might be with the framework. Excellent. I see quite a few 3s that folks are putting in the chat. Tells me that a few of you have read a section or 2. I see about 2 1s, and that's great that we have 1 or 2 1s, because that means that you get to hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll be able to move up the scale as you learn more about the framework, because now you have heard of it. Now you have some context for it. And it's great to see some 2s as well. I see a few 2s. That means that folks have heard of it. They might have talked about it a little bit, but this is a great opportunity to learn even more of it. Something that I'm not seeing in the chat, I don't see any 4s and I don't see any 5s, and that's completely fine because we're all continuing to learn as we think about the framework. So it's great to see the level of experience that each of us has and how we feel about this important document. Thank you all for sharing, and please keep putting those numbers in the chat if you have time. So moving on, what is an instructional framework? What is this document that we're talking about? So an instructional framework is at heart a guidance document. So including the 2023 math framework, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that it's a guidance document for how to implement the content standards, including research-based approaches for delivering instruction at each grade level. Lastly, a framework has important considerations for important pieces of instruction, such as assessment, and also it has important considerations and guidance on how to do the adoption of instructional materials. So it's a very important document, and I think in a way it does set a lot of the ground for how professional development and how districts might be able to explore and talk about math instruction in their districts. In the next slide, you'll see that for the framework, there's also many critical audiences that we want to elevate. Audiences that are important for a document such as this include district leaders. It includes educators because it provides important guidance for how to deliver instruction. Instructional coaches are very important audiences, but as well as families and how families might be able to connect and support their students in math instruction. And we know very well from our work advocating on behalf of the math framework that content developers are also paying very close attention to this document, and that they're the ones that are going to be submitting materials for adoption at the state level and also adoptions in your very own districts. Next slide. So why are we talking about the math framework in the context of English learners? So first of all, I just want to ground us in the fact that as we look at our student population, about 18% of our students in the last school year were classified as English learners. Moreover, if we look at the overall student population, nearly 40% of our California public school students speak another language other than English at home. That means that we have over 100 beautiful languages represented in our California public schools. Now, this is important because as we look at the math achievement for our California public school students, we see a drastic need to improve outcomes. Something that we notice across all student groups is that the proportion of students that are being prepared to meet math standards declines sharply as we move up the grade levels. And if you look at those blue bars for our English learners, we see that only 2% of English learners are being provided with the content to be able to demonstrate proficiency in math in the math standards by 11th grade. But moreover, even as we look at our reclassified fluent English proficient students and the green bars of this graph, we see that by 11th grade, only 1 in 4 of our reclassified fluent English proficient students are being prepared to meet the math standards. So this is an urgent need for us to be able to focus on, and it's something that we want to make sure that we elevate. Now, in the next slide, I just want to quickly go over what our English learners deserve in our California public school system. I think it's important for us to be grounded in this. Our English learners deserve to gain English proficiency. We know that this is critical, and this is why we have English language development throughout the content as a goal. But we also want them to be able to build their home language proficiency and to also be able to gain proficiency in all, and I mean all academic content areas, including math, science, arts, all of the social studies. We want to make sure that they're prepared in all of the content areas, and they deserve to experience a well-rounded education, just like all students or any other students in our districts. Now, I want to, before I hand this over to Veronica, I want to ground this again in the connection that this has to a very important policy in California, which is the English Learner Roadmap Policy. So if you go to the next 2 slides, I just want to elevate, next one. Next one. I just want to elevate that what we're going to talk about today really connects to the English Learner Roadmap Policy. It specifically connects to Principle 2 of the roadmap, intellectual quality of instruction and meaningful access. In that, when we mean meaningful access, we truly mean making sure that our English learners are able to access the content across all of the grade levels. In the previous slides that I was not able to go over with you today, you'll be able to see, we'll be able to share those slides, but you'll be able to see some of the shifts in the framework since it was updated that have really elevated how we might be able to speak about English learners. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Veronica, who's going to talk a little bit more about the importance of integrated English language development.
Thank you, Manuel. And so as we are engaging and getting to know the new math framework, and we have heard about the urgent need to focus on multilingual English learners, how do we support the students? How do we support them so that they can learn and thrive in our mathematics classrooms? And so in the next slide, we have a question for you. How prepared are you? How prepared do you feel, or how prepared are your math educators to deliver integrated ELD instruction within the mathematics content? So on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being the excellent, well prepared, and 1 kind of like no preparation, how would you describe your teachers, yourself, maybe your schools? So we're seeing some 4s, 3s, 2s, 3s, 2s. Thank you. And we appreciate that because you sharing these really helps us to see, kind of calibrate, where are we in our different contexts. And in the next slide, we'll see, what do teachers think? There was a study that was done, and it was found that more than 70% of teachers reported that they do not feel fully prepared to teach multilingual English learners. in the grade level content standards. And more than 60% of the surveyed math teachers in California said that they didn't feel that their materials provided the support or the guidance that they needed to serve this population of students. So how do we respond? And we have this question in the next slide, please. How do we respond? What do we need to do? Because whether we say something, we do something, or don't say anything or don't do anything, our decisions impact our students. So in the next slide, we see some of the opportunities that the math framework highlights for English learners, multilingual English learners. So equitable course access, designated and integrated English language development as part of a comprehensive ELD program, and adoption of high quality instructional materials. And in the next slide, we see that the math framework also highlights 3 dimensions of systemic change that support mathematics instruction. And so we have heard that our students are lagging, multilingual English learners are lagging in math. That is not news, right? But so how do we engage as part of a system to change, to shift pedagogically, but also systemically in the ways that the math framework is guiding? So in the next slide, we have some of the main connections that the math framework makes to a comprehensive English language development program. And a comprehensive program has 2 components, designated ELD and integrated ELD. And so in the next slide, we'll see that a comprehensive English language development program doesn't focus just in learning the vocabulary. It doesn't focus just on pronunciation, but a comprehensive program focuses in the whole person, the whole child, and the students learn the content through English. So we don't want to separate the learning the language from learning the content. It goes together. Marta said, we are all teachers of language. We are all language teachers in whatever the subject that we are teaching. And at the same time, through a comprehensive program, we provide students opportunities to learn how to use how to use English, and then how English works. In the next slide, we see how designated ELD is a time that is separated during the day, and it's mandated by the state for English learners to have this purposely, specifically designed time where students engage in interacting in meaningful ways, and also they are learning specific ways, specific structures of how language works. In the next slide, we see the features of integrated ELD. So integrated ELD is not another time of the instructional day. It's not a class, but it is an instructional experience that us as teachers, as educators, need to provide for multilingual English learners through the day and across all the disciplines. And so we need to provide scaffolds. We need to make sure that the content is accessed in meaningful and relevant ways, and that it develops the content and the academic language. And you'll have all these and some other resources in the participant folder as well. So in the next slide, we see that assessment. This is a key thing. The LPAC is one of the assessments that keeps many of our students from reclassifying. And so when we're thinking about integrated ELD and designated ELD, we also need to keep in mind how assessment influences also that, and how we need to make sure that our students are prepared to engage in assessments that will demonstrate what they know and their language and their content growth. So assessment is also a key part of a comprehensive language development program. So We have heard about some shifts, and if we go to the next slide, we come now to a time of hearing from our colleagues. I am honored to bring this distinguished panel to you. We have designed the panel time to include an opportunity to hear from exemplary teachers and district leaders who will provide examples of how they have elevated integrated ELD in mathematics instruction. We will hear examples of pedagogical practices that are responsive to multilingual English learners, and also about spearheading district-wide efforts for professional learning and the integration of high-quality instructional materials that support both math content and language development for multilingual English learners. So I will ask each of the members of the panel to briefly introduce themselves, but I invite you to look in our participant folder for their full bio, and you can learn more about the great work that each of them is engaged in. And as we dive into this discussion, our focus will be in the practical strategies, the successes and challenges that they've encountered, all with the shared goal of ensuring equity and access for every student. And I am confident that their insights will inspire and inform the important work that you are doing in your own schools and districts. And with that, I will pass it to our distinguished panel.
Hello, my name is Lourdes Salazar. I'm a TK teacher with the LA Unified School District. Thanks for having me.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Pariso, and I am a middle school math teacher as well as a Teach Plus California senior policy.
We'll pass it on to Delhi.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Yakub. I am the Director of Student Programs in Delhi Unified School District.
Francisco Romo, a Senior Director of Educational Services for Delhi Unified School District.
And now we'll pass it to San Leandro.
Hi, I'm Joanne Clark. I'm the Senior Director for Educational Services for San Leandro Unified.
Good evening. My name is Celine Liu. I'm currently working with the English Learner Success Forum to support the adoption and implementation of high-quality instructional materials in California.
Thank you. And overall, the California Math Framework acknowledges that teachers are critical agents of change who can create inclusive student-centered classrooms that promote deep mathematical understanding and equity. And so we are going to start with our first group of panelists, Lourdes and Rebecca, who will share a little bit more about how they are the critical agents of change in their context. So Lourdes, please describe how you approach integrated ELD in mathematics instruction in your classroom. And we'd love to ask you if you could share a specific example of how you integrate language development within a math lesson.
Thank you. On the next slide, you will see that I am a universal transitional kindergarten teacher, and although the new framework does not include transitional kindergarten, we fortunately this summer were able to get the PTKLF, which is our learning foundations for the primary. And these strands, counting and cardinality, operations and algebraic thinking, measurement and data and geometry and spatial thinking, all correlate with the framework that was already provided. So I'm excited to see this shift. And in the next slide, you will see how this is how we integrate ELD in our classroom. We use cognitive guided instruction, which is a student-centered approach to teaching math. And one of the most important things that Veronica mentioned earlier is that We want to make sure that we're developing both content knowledge and academic language throughout the day, and especially in math with our students. What we do is it starts with students already, we gather what students already know, and we build on that natural number sense and intuitive approaches to problem solving. So it is super important with integrated ELD that it is a routine and that the students know what's coming and that it is structured. So on a daily basis, we do daily number talks, and we accept all responses of children, whatever the language is. And to build that integrated English, we make sure that we have sentence frames for students, and that as a teacher, when we have English language learners, that we are responding maybe in the language that we want them to learn, and that we're reframing their answers so that we are integrating that new language for them. On the next slide, part of this also is counting collections, and this allows us to use a variety of objects and items for students to count. So you'll see some pictures here where students are counting. We're integrating not just the English language, but also sensory, especially at this age and time. Everything needs to be through play for them in order to learn. And so as the students are approaching counting, sorting, measuring, we're ensuring that the students are using the English language using sentence frames, like I said earlier, or rephrasing their statements so that they're always listening to the second language. One of the key points in this new curriculum too is problem solving and making sure that the students are relating what they're learning to themselves. And I think that's critical for all students, especially multilingual learners, that they find a connection to what they're doing. And so we make sure that we are creating problems that are relevant to them. And so we create problems. We don't call them problem stories for these, we call them math stories. Because sometimes when you say math problem, they think they're not gonna be able to solve it. So we say we're doing math stories related to the students within the classroom, and together we unpack the problem so they know how to think. Now, one of the critical things for our ELD students is to make sure that they understand the vocabulary and that they learn to express their thinking, because a lot of times this is the first time they're talking about what their brain, a lot of times they'll start and say, my brain told me. Well, how did your brain tell you this, right? So we're exposing them to vocabulary, to math vocabulary we want them to use. And so by the end of transitional kindergarten, these students are able to really explain their thinking and how they're processing it in all the different areas. And so I think just by being structured and ensuring that we are valuing what they're responding and making suggestions to include that English vocabulary, and ensuring that they are practicing what they do and that they do this on a daily basis, or ensuring that they're integrating this ELD English language throughout the day, especially during math.
Thank you, Lourdes. And seeing this shift, the ways that you have incorporated the connection with the home language, with what they bring, the assets that they bring into their classroom. It's so important to remember that it starts when they're little, right? And so now we're going to move into a little higher in the spectrum of our grades. And Rebecca, tell us a little bit about, based on your experience as a teacher leader, how have you approached implementing integrated ELD at the different levels of the system, classroom, school, district, and beyond? And how has this impacted learning outcomes for your English learner?
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I will say my journey is quite similar to what you were talking about earlier. Prior to this job, I worked in a district that was 67% Caucasian and 24% socioeconomically disadvantaged. And now to my current position, that's 89% Hispanic and 89% socioeconomically disadvantaged. I'm not Hispanic and I don't speak Spanish. And so it was quite a shock for me. And I'll tell you, I spent a lot of time searching for resources online on how to meet the needs of my multilingual learners. But, unfortunately, I didn't find a lot that was geared toward math. Most of what I saw was for social studies, language arts, and science. And so I started making my own. So, I found this huge, huge need for this high quality math instruction and instructional materials that are that will be accessible and equitable for all of California students. So one of the things I focused on in particular is giving my students an opportunity to interact with language. I think sometimes us math teachers, we get stuck on the idea that math is page 20, 2 through 16 even, right? And tomorrow it's going to be page 22, 2 through 16 even. And I guess the important lesson to learn is that math is so much more than a textbook. And we provide our multilingual learners these wonderful experiences in all the other subject areas, but not in mathematics. And so that's a huge shift that we need to focus on. So giving my students a chance like this to work through process grids or comparative input charts, giving them a chance to reflect on what they've learned, reflect on their vocabulary development, and how they're improving, and just being creative with the vocabulary. If you go on to the next slide, you'll see another important area I've been working on as well throughout the district and the state is this idea of culturally responsive curriculum. We need to notice and value students' identities, right? And help them see themselves in the math curriculum. So in order to do that, I like to implement expressive projects for my students that will allow them to find their math identity and their sense of belonging, because with that comes more engagement for students of color in our STEAM fields, which is what we so desperately need, right? So focusing on this idea that diversity in background is not a barrier, but it's an asset, and we can all benefit from it. And I have found a lot of benefits. If you go on to the next slide, you'll see my 7th graders last year were extremely successful. My 7th graders doubled the amount of 7th graders considered proficient on the CAS. 4.5% of my students jumped from a 1 to a 3, and it was the lowest, my class was the lowest level of 1s my district has seen in 9 years. And here's why this is important, because there's a difference between not getting a 1 because you're not understanding the content and getting a 1 because you're not understanding the language. And we need to be able to separate those two and identify the students that just need access with more language support. And so, with as a senior policy fellow with Teach Plus California, with the passage of AB 2074, we're really just kind of looking forward and I'm going to, with working with a group of just amazing educators throughout California and really just looking at how can we best support with the implementation of the English Learner Roadmap, because I know there are more teachers like me out there who need that additional support, who don't know how to meet the needs of multilingual learners. And this is a really, really important topic.
Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you for expanding on that, the theme of the importance of seeing the student, of knowing the student, and allowing the student to bring what they know in whatever language that they bring. So thank you so much. And the new frameworks view that teachers are central to student outcomes in mathematics and influencing everything from academic achievement to equitable classroom practices. We see some of the examples that right here with us from the practice of these colleagues. But we also saw that, and you mentioned that, Rebecca, as well, that more than 70% of teachers don't feel prepared to serve multilingual English learners. And I hear your call, Rebecca, right? To find that support for teachers who are not prepared and are not feeling prepared. And the framework advocates for supporting teachers with the resources and professional learning that is needed to maximize their positive impact and emphasizes the critical role of professional learning. And so we are going to go now to our second group of panelists. And I am going to invite Francisco, and I know Francisco and Jennifer team tag, and you do a lot together. But I would like to ask Francisco, would you please share the district-wide strategies that you've implemented to support that professional learning need that there is in the field that is focused on integrated English language development for mathematics instruction?
Thank you, Veronica. If you go to slide 3, if that's possible. So the piece on our Delhi journey and the idea of being able to collaborate on this idea of integrated ELD within mathematics is the idea is how do we make the EL roadmap come to life in terms of an experiential model. And so, for example, when you take the EL roadmap principle number 2, intellectual quality of instructional meaningful access, within that, we look specifically at instructional practices and strategies that would really bring about that intellectual quality in instruction. And not only that, but it would really push the integrated ELD as it applies to those collaborative structures to develop oral language proficiency. So the idea of picking very specific instructional practices and strategies, such as building thinking classrooms. And for those that are not familiar with building thinking classrooms, it's the idea of the teacher being able to set up the classroom in a way that's very much a facilitator mode, and that students really take an ownership of their learning. And where you have multiple whiteboards around the classroom, and they're engaging in the process with the idea of them really pushing to not just one solution, but possible many solutions to that problem, or even better, learning from their mistakes, right? And how oftentimes are English learners given that opportunity to fail and learn from their mistakes and not be afraid to the idea of pushing that language, let alone the content. The same thing can be said for CRA, or the concrete representation or abstract thinking, which ties in really a lot very nicely to the building thinking classroom. Those two very much fit the world of intermediate grades, middle school and high school. With the number talks, very much used in the primary grades, intermediate grades, a little bit into the middle school, but the number talks really gets a chance to see the visual representation of mathematics. Oftentimes our English learners don't get a chance to see the mathematics come to life through manipulatives, through visuals, to be able to show it many different ways and get a chance to partner up with their partner and have that positive dissonance, of I can't figure this out. So the idea of really thinking about what we've done in terms of Delhi is really the idea is how do we bring that EO roadmap to life? Well, we have to experience it as adults as well. So we really thought about if we're going to increase the pedagogy of teachers, we have to think of, and Dr. Yakub will chime in when she goes over her slide, is we have to think about the andragogy. And that was something that I really did not know about. The andragogy is how do adults learn? And so that's been also a journey to be able to, that they go side by side. Pedagogy and andragogy go side by side. So the idea of the 8 mathematical practices, the idea of using, for example, number 3, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. How does that come to life within building thinking classrooms, within CRA, within number talks? And so the idea is teachers need to see that and be able to be involved in a model that supports them. We talk about multi-tiered system of support for students, all the tiers for support. We often forget all the tiers that are needed for the adults, the teachers, the principals, as much as the students. And so the idea of that is we think about frameworks. One piece of that we actually implemented really in terms of moving forward is returning to the research. What does Hattie say in terms of the 8 minds frameworks for teachers? And so the idea of Hattie's work, that the biggest influence is the teacher. So the idea of focusing, on that piece, there's just a couple things that we're doing, for example, with the 712. Dr. Yakub and I are currently working with an improvement science framework with them. And the idea there is we're taking through 5 sessions throughout the academic year with some action period in between. And we're doing exactly this. We're tackling the ideas. What does building thinking classroom look like? And really building the capacity from within, although we need thought partners from outside and definitely have helped us, whether it's a county office or other third-party providers or this forum here is a thought partner. So you have many here. The idea is, how do you use those thought partners to build the capacity of the people who are in the trenches? And so that cohort that we're taking the math through is we're very excited that we're starting to look at A through G data. And one piece that was an aha moment for us in terms of the A through G data is, first we were looking at the overall, how many students were graduating A through G in Delhi. And we have 41% that approximately met the A through G criteria in 2024 as we finish the year. However, only 17% of our English learners were remaining A through G. So the idea there is, as we took this math cohort and we were taking them through, going through improvement science. Improvement science is, how do we get better, right? How do we get better? What protocols do we use to push our thinking to get better? And in one of the sessions, the math team actually flipped it and said, maybe we're looking at it wrong. Maybe in the idea of looking at the 17% and trying to get 18 or 20% and trying to raise the bar that way, maybe we flip it. We flip it by looking, actually, we have an 83% failure rate. And that was an eye-opening for everyone. Then we started looking at the root causes of how do you change then that piece with integrated ELD. How do we do that then as roadmap with a guide, 8 mathematical practices being intentional? We can't tackle them all, but how do we start diving deep into one and start looking at our work through the lens of a scientist? And that's where we're at. And from there, I'll pass it on.
Thank you. And that sounds like an amazing breakthrough for your team, your cohort, to be able to see, wow, we need to look at this from a different angle to really understand the urgency that we have in our hands. And so, Jennifer, share a little bit more about the growth of these. And I imagine that you and your teachers experienced a lot of challenges. So share some of these and how these were overcome.
So one of the things that, we talked, can you go back to the first slide or the second slide, please? Yes. So one of the challenges that we faced when we first came to Delhi Unified was that our teachers really didn't have any professional development. Or if any professional development happened, it was more through spray and pray. And that's not the kind of professional development we want, right? Math framework is very clear. Hattie is very clear that teachers are central to learning and they need the support in order for effective implementation to happen. And so what we embarked on is what you see here is that 360-degree wraparound model, professional development cycle, which happens 5 to 6 times a year per teacher. And what's really impactful here is that oftentimes our professional development, some things that Mr. Romo talked about, we really have focused on pedagogy. And what we've taken on is that need of andragogy, that adult learning from Stephen Lee. He shares 6 features of andragogy. And we've embedded those, and those are also in the folder that you guys can reference. We've embedded those in our professional development, where we want opportunities for adults in the system to impart knowledge and strategies so our students can gain that proficiency in all academic content area that Manuel was talking about. So bringing in number talks, CRA, building thinking classrooms. So some of the structures that we've embedded, of course, within ELD, integrated ELD, with collaborative structures, language structures, supporting the oral and literacy development in math, looking at the LPAC task types, the 4 domains, and how do they fit into math literacy? Because literacy isn't just reading. Literacy is math, literacy is science, literacy is history, social studies, all of those areas. So our professional development has been really, really exciting for our teachers. There's been a lot of positive feedback where our coach actually trains, then the teachers have planning time. From planning time, the coach gives the teachers one-on-one demo lesson. They watch the demo, teacher and coach come back and they talk about what does that demo say? What does it show? How is integrated ELD embedded? And then the coach says, okay, now I'm going to come watch you teach. So the coach goes in and watches the teacher use the instructional strategies that they've been trained in. And then they actually come back and look at the lesson that was taught and provide specific feedback. And then they gather data and then they come back for another professional learning. That cycle is that 360-degree wraparound, and it happens for every single teacher within our district 5 to 6 times a year, so that they feel supported and they're implementing what is effective in the classroom.
Thank you, Jennifer. Wow. And thank you for sharing, Francisco and Jennifer, about this effort that you're doing, that you're leading to filling the gap. You started, Jennifer, mentioning that your teachers needed the professional development. And the math framework outlines the need for comprehensive, equity-focused professional learning that you said, spray and pray. That doesn't work, right? But that we want to prepare teachers to support multilingual English learners in mathematics through being able to implement integrated and designated ELD. So the California Math Framework highlights that high quality instructional materials are essential for providing English learners with equitable access to mathematics and content. And so we need the professional development to ensure that teachers are prepared to effectively use those materials in their classroom. And so now we're going to transition to our third group of panelists. And Joanne, we're going to ask you, because your district already went through an adoption of high quality instructional materials. And so you are leading the pack. You are leading us. And Celine was also part of that process. And Joanne, for you, I would like to know, as your district engaged in the adoption process of mathematics materials, how did your leadership, your teachers, how did you engage diverse educational partners in the process? And what were some of the key considerations to ensure that the materials supported the content, but also the language development for multilingual English learners?
Yeah, so we did the process at our secondary math level. So we're just at the high school with our algebra, geometry, and algebra 2 courses. And so we'll share a slide coming up around the process. If you can go to next slide. But we really wanted to look at the adoption process with the multilingual learners as our students in mind. And it really started with the high school engaging with our DLAC and our ELAC and looking at our surveys and engaging with our leaders around the work to really think about what is the curriculum, the materials say. We wanted to look at materials from a multilingual lens. So if you go to the next slide, just a little bit about our district is that we do have 14 schools, but we have a little less than 9,000 students. But what you'll see is we have 72% of low income, but 26% of our students are English learners. But specifically in our district, we have over 50 languages. I'm sorry, over 30 languages in our district, and 50% is English, and over 30% is Spanish, and then we have over 8% as our Cantonese speakers, and then we have all the other languages as well. So we really knew that this was a really important process, and we took a lot of time. It didn't happen overnight, and we'll go to the next slide, and Celine Liu was our Director of Teaching and Learning in San Leandro, and she really took some time to partner with ELSF to think about the needs at the high school math adoption.
Yeah, so what you might first notice from this timeline is that the adoption process was a multi-year process, which is longer than some other adoptions that I've been a part of and that I'm aware of. And that is because we really took the time, if you focus on the yellow part of the timeline there, to take advantage of the opportunity for a material review and adoption to build capacity within the district. Not just to select high quality materials, but that's step one, right? Like the implementation and how teachers are using the materials is really where students can benefit. And so our partnership really took advantage of relationships that we had with ELSF at the time. They were developing a tool to look at criteria for reviewing instructional materials that were responsive to multilingual learners, and partnered with them throughout the process in order to provide professional learning, as well as go through a material selection process. Some of the things that happened in terms of ensuring that we were addressing both content and language development is that we started with looking at criteria as outlined by the state in the framework. At the time, it was still the 2014 framework, but the chapter was general enough and deep enough in the content that it provided an area for our teachers to start with, to start thinking about what are the particular needs for our students at large, and then specifically for our multilingual learners. And then through the work with ELSF that I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, we were able to deepen and expand that criteria in order to assure that there were features and supports within the curriculum that would attend to the needs of supporting multilingual learners. What really stands out about this process is by focusing on the needs of multilingual learners and through the partnership, we were able to keep an equity lens and keep the needs of multilingual learners front and center throughout. So just like when we look at instructional materials and sometimes we see the supports and the scaffolds and the attention to multilingual learners as a sidebar or as an afterthought or something in the margins, whereas we really want to see it embedded and central in the process, our partnership and the way that we facilitated our adoption process centralized the needs of those students. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So the department chairs at the Comprehensive High School in San Leandro were really strong in their desire to make sure that the entire department participated in the adoption. And so they dedicated department meetings, collaboration time for that period of time so that everyone could participate. And again, that meant that we were building capacity for all teachers. That included teachers who were teaching in our newcomer pathway, who maybe had a little bit more information or experience on the needs of multilingual learners. It also included resource specialists in some of our co-taught classes who could attend to the needs of our dually identified students as well. But what you see on the screen here definitely reflected how many of our teachers felt about their instructional materials as we move forward. And so that informed, again, the criteria that we selected and developed. So if you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about, so these are some of the things throughout the process. And, you know, I think again, too, the partnership with ELSF really and being connected to our ELAC and our DLAC speaks to how the system was supporting an equity-focused process that supported multilingual learners. So ELSF was really targeted in helping us to track the mindsets and the learnings of teachers throughout the process. And so you'll see here some of what they said at the beginning of the process in terms of what they hoped for, what they looked for, not just for textbook selection, but also for kind of their learning and understanding at large. So specifically, if you go to the next slide, one of the big pieces about refining our needs and refining those criteria was looking at data regarding our English learners. And so our previous speakers have talked about the need to be data informed on that. So that was not only where were their needs, but also where were they really strong, right, as we moved into the process. Again, we overlaid our criteria with the criteria from the framework, and then using the tool from our partner, we were able to add on and supplement our kind of access and equity category for our materials in order to inform the review process that started later on. We only used materials that were greenlit green from Ed Reports all the way through. So that was our filter. And then just like, you know, most adoption processes, I think, narrowed it down to a couple options that teachers then tested in their classrooms with students. Last year was the first year of implementation of the materials. And so teachers were becoming familiar with the program itself. But I think overall, in terms of the system, what we learned is where our teacher needs were as well in terms of supporting them in that implementation process with professional learning in order to make sure that, yes, those materials had those features supportive of English learners, but then how do we make sure that it actually gets to the students in our classrooms? And then the last slide is just some statements and some information about where teachers felt at the end of the process. It was definitely, like I said, a long process. The next slide will show some of the quotes and some shifts in the survey data that we collected. It was a long process, but we know that equity work takes time, right? As we're shifting and upending systems the way that they're designed. And so, I think overall, they definitely appreciated, even though it was long and sometimes they were frustrated, they appreciated the attention that we paid to students that they knew they needed to serve differently and better in their math classrooms.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanna and Celine, for leading the way and showing us the importance of looking at the different layers of what needs to be part of the process as we are considering an investment, right, in materials that are going to have an impact for students. And the guidance from the new California Math Framework emphasizes that teaching English learners requires intentional integration of language development with math instruction that is supported by ongoing professional development and also with high quality instructional materials that provide scaffolds that are culturally responsive and that provide for those opportunities that you so beautifully highlighted in the process and in the shifts in how your teachers felt and what they learned through the process. And so now we're going to bring back our full panel, and we have some final questions. We, as a math community that is passionate and excited to learn more about how do we best serve multilingual English learners. So we're going to ask the Delhi team, how can we as educators, administrators, and leaders continue to collaborate to strengthen the integration of language development in mathematics instruction across the state? And feel free to just jump in.
So something that we have been embarking upon is really looking at how do we embed the LPAC task types within our instruction. And something that we've really been focusing on is the language functions that are critical for developing language, which really look at sequencing, classifying, structuring language in a way for students to have access. And through the task types, as we know, the task types are ELA, ELD standard aligned. And so the task types really support how students can access reading, writing, oral development. Oral language development is so critical, and providing students with those opportunities where they're actually working through a math concept, math activity, but talking about it. Being able to verbalize, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Really being able to answer the question, why? And how do we provide that? Is we provide that through structures that we create for them. And those structures could include anything like sentence structures, opportunities for them to have turn and talk, being able to, even if they are able to use one or two of the structures, maybe we look at the varying sentence structures and look at how those levels differentiate for our students so that students can have access. It's really providing the access to begin with oral development, which eventually leads to that, to the reading and writing piece of literacy. And math.
The piece that I'll add, Veronica, is the idea of looking at different types of data. And so we have a thought partner in Merced County Office of Education, who's a thought partner and also provides professional development with us and has agreed upon the idea of the model. But as Dr. Michael Fullen clearly states in coherence is, how do you develop a middle? And the middle is the folks, the principals, the teachers, and the site administration. Because ultimately, when that third-party provider leaves, what happens? So you need that critical piece, and Merced County has surely been a nice thought partner in that. And one thing that we've learned in terms of the work that Dr. Yakub and I have talked about is when we're looking at data, sometimes you have to start with implementation data. And what does that mean? The idea sometimes we think about benchmark or we lagging data such as the state test, but implementation data is even much more important at the very beginning when you're trying to build those instructional routines, those practices, those strategies, is walking into a classroom and how do you see evidence of the teacher making progress? And that's implementation data. And how do you collect the right implementation data based on teacher feedback? And that can only happen through that model of the idea of building that trust between the coaches and the teachers to be able to say, come do some demo lessons. Now come watch me. And be able to go in the classroom, because it could be perceived that you're walking in a classroom and you think there's not too much evidence of number talks in there. And this actually happened when a little push from one of our colleagues is, well, go look at this particular classroom. It might not seem that there's implementation happening, but if you pull back the different chart papers, that teacher has about 15 chart papers there of number talks. And that's true implementation data, the idea of showing it. So you could actually show the whole classroom, and that's also, but also the idea that they could be right behind each other. And so that's big, is looking at data in many different ways, and not just in the quantitative, but now we're really looking at the qualitative measures that are happening. And that's also feedback from teachers. The biggest thing that we've seen in terms of flip is when a teacher's saying to a coach, come see me do number talks. That is really true of implementation data. The last piece, I think that's been a very big hit for us. For the very first time, we're owning our LCAP. And my co-partner here, author with Dr. Jennifer Yakub, we actually use frameworks. And that was one of our slides. We actually use frameworks. We use the MTSS framework, the EO roadmap, Dr. Michael Fullen's coherence, Simon Sinek's circle, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I said, that's a lot of frameworks. Well, the idea is we were hitting 3 different goals. And the idea is we needed it all as rubrics and to be able to say, are we really hitting the whole child with this LCAP? So we're very excited that we actually have now moved to something that's more of an actionable plan that actually has a continuous improvement cycle. That's the last pieces I wanted to add. But Dr. Yakub has been a tremendous partner, and we're kind of going on this journey.
One thing
Thank
that I
you.
wanted to add in really quick, if I could, is we really need to change the narrative around culturally responsive curriculum and high quality, instruction. When we're talking about incorporating process grids and focusing on vocabulary and building a sense of culture and community in our classroom, we're not just benefiting our multilingual learners. Those are UDL supports that are beneficial for all of our students. So this is something that we have to make a priority, and we have to change the narrative. No, this is what all of our students need. It's especially helpful for our multilingual learners, but it's also helpful for our students with special needs, our students who are just a little bit lower, who need a little bit extra.
Thank you. Thank you. And please feel free to jump in if you have something to add to that question. But focusing now on the classroom, Lourdes and Rebecca, what advice would you offer to educators and districts or schools that are focusing or refocusing on the implementation of integrated English language development in mathematics? And are there any key takeaways or lessons from your experiences that could help guide their journey?
I think key is what we've been talking about professional development. You can't do this alone in your classroom. Really, you have to have a team on board. And like Mr. Romo mentioned and Ms. Yakub, at our school, we did the same thing within our school community. We did lesson studies on math and how we were integrating everything. And it's funny how everything you're saying is things that are happening within our school community also. We do have teachers that volunteer and say, come watch my number talks, come watch my problem stories. And it varies from UTK to 5th grade. And I think one of the key things that you mentioned is really making this powerful for our students so that they have that vocabulary, so that they're able to redesignate, so that they acquire the language and they know the skills that they need to be able to become English language proficient, right? Whatever that is in whatever test it is. But I truly believe that I think everybody in some way or another has sent the same message, that it really takes a team, and it's a group effort, and it can't just be an isolated something that's happening in one classroom.
I thought the last question was for all of us, so I didn't realize you had a separate one for us, but my answer is the same, right? Just changing that narrative and making sure that language is a priority, even if we're math teachers. I'm a math teacher. I don't need to, incorporate writing and vocabulary, and I don't need to learn these extra strategies. That is completely wrong. And so just that idea of showing like, hey, this is working and this is what our students need. And we have to make sure that we are creating inclusive classrooms and that our instructional strategies are meeting the needs of all of our students instead of just a couple.
Absolutely. Thank you. And San Leandro team, what advice would you give districts who are starting to enter this process?
I was just about to add a comment on the last question, but this actually fits in with this question too. And partly because of our size, we're lucky of the way we started it with the high school. The whole entire math department got involved. And as Celine stated, it was not no one could opt out. It was part of everyone being on board and understanding that all teachers, all of us have multilingual learners in the classroom every period. And to be honest, even, so many years ago, that was kind of a new thinking for many teachers. What? Really? Yeah. So really understanding that the entire no opt out, because they knew the math department, all students were going to come through and experience math with one of the teachers and potentially multiple years in a row. It was really important that they all participated. And so I think that's the biggest takeaway, and what we start to do in the middle school and the other style of the elementary to continue that best practice.
I think too, this notion of how do we have a transformational adoption process? How do we not have it just be transactional, that we're bringing new materials in the classroom? Oftentimes, I think when we adopt, there's an idea that, oh, and then once we have the materials in place, then we'll do the professional learning, right? But actually, the professional learning was happening throughout the process. And so we started before the materials even landed in front of students. And the mindset shift and the culture shift that happened as a result of centering the process with a multilingual learner lens meant that, even with the bumps and hiccups of like, oh, where do I find this support? Where do I find the assessments in the program? Teachers and administrators were still prioritizing the needs and the learning of multilingual learners. And then I think the other piece too, again, is that what I didn't get to say is that we had a teacher from the continuation high school who also participated. We had middle school teachers who participated. The public comment, the involvement of the community in the process. And so again, it was not just math teachers who were engaging in this work. We had an EL specialist who started in the process. Unfortunately, she couldn't complete for different reasons, but bringing that expertise and that partnership to inform and create a robust adoption process was really important in the outcomes, I think, regarding professional learning that we were able to achieve.
Thank you, Celine. And thank you for highlighting this, term of transformational adoption. And I think that we all as educators, we want to see transformation in our classrooms, in our students, and especially through math, we want to see this transformation. And the math framework gives us this opportunity to look at math, to look at our students, to look at ourselves as educators in a new light, in a new angle, to be able to be part of this transformation. And I want to thank each of you for being here today, for sharing your experiences. Thank you for helping us build that foundation that we need to enter into being transformers, to follow that image, Celine, and to be part of the transformation that can happen in our classrooms. And it starts with us. And so I want to thank you very much. I want to invite our audience to thank our panelists for taking the time. I know we're all busy, but being here to help us learn more about the math framework and about how can we engage in being part of that transformation. It's wonderful. So thank you again for being here. And now I will pass it to Manuel Buenrostro, and we'll continue this conversation.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, panelists. And we just want to share a few resources as we wrap up this great conversation. And I just want to again thank all of our panelists for the great information and for sharing a lot of the great work that you're doing, because we also have to celebrate. We have a lot of need in California. We know that from the data, but we also need to celebrate our brave educators, district leaders, and folks that support our communities and all the great work that they're doing to tackle these challenges. So I just want to quickly go over what can you do to support integrated English language development within mathematics context. We have some ideas of how you might be able to move the needle in your districts. And I'm sure that as you heard from our districts, you might have developed your own ideas. Please jot them down. We want to make sure that we support you and that you are inspired to move forward. The first idea that we have here is to continue to invest in professional learning for math educators that is focused on integrated English language development. It's not enough to just do professional development on math, but we got to do professional development that is focused on integrated ELD. And as we do that, we want to ensure that English language development specialists are equipped and have capacity to deliver coaching and support to the math educators, because we also need to acknowledge that our ELD specialists are being tasked to do a lot, and we need to make sure that they are being provided with that capacity. And then lastly, this is critical, and we can't emphasize this enough, especially with the silos that we create in education. We want to make sure that we continue to encourage collaboration between your math departments and your multilingual departments. Are they talking to each other? Are they in spaces where they can collaborate more often? And can they co-develop professional development opportunities for our students? We feel like that's the best way to move the needle forward. And as we go on to the next slide, just recapping some broader recommendations that we have from the math framework. So in the next slide, you'll be able to see additional recommendations that come up from the framework. We want to make sure that as we think about rigorous access to coursework, we hope that you're taking a look at your district policies and data that talk about equitable access to rigorous math coursework, and you're thinking about how you might be able to increase access to our multilingual learners and the supports so that these students are successful once they get access to these courses. And we hope that you also proactively set goals and have a vision for the adoption of your high quality instructional materials. As you heard from San Leandro, they started early. We hope that you're starting those conversations about what the math adoptions can look like in your districts, even as the state is still set to adopt recommended materials in grades kinder through 8th grade and over the next summer. So what we know, the state adoption process is going to be underway next year. They haven't adopted the recommended materials, but we hope that you start thinking about what this is going to look like in your districts.
I want to bring your attention. Sorry, Crystal, do you mind going back to the previous slide? Just bringing your attention to the triangle, the opportunity that we have to transform systems, and we are part of systems, and we are advocates, and we can transform systems, starting with our classroom. And we heard some of the experiences and some of the stories that of how transformation is happening across our districts. And now if we go to the next slide, Crystal, thank you so much. I asked this question before, how do our decisions impact our multilingual and English learner students? So where do we go from here? In the next slide, how do we respond? Knowing that what we do and don't do has an impact. So one thing that Dr. Romo mentioned that impacted me was that we need to focus in pedagogy and andragogy. So we need to also think about how we are learning. So in the next slide, I want to invite you to explore some of the resources that our center has available for you as you engage in the process of growing as an educator who wants to embrace the shifts that the math framework is offering. We have resources in our website, in our publications that are available to you for free at no cost. And we also have feature speaker video resources that focus on math, and we have curated the section so that you can use those resources to engage in conversations with your colleagues. One of the things that our practitioners, Lourdes and Rebecca mentioned, and also everybody mentioned, is that we can't do it alone. And so as we enter into new learning, we can't do it alone. So in the next slide, we have opportunities to engage. We are offering institutes. We have an institute for formative assessment for multilingual English learners, leadership for equity. We have professional learning focusing on academic Spanish, Mandarin, and so we invited to explore these so that you continue growing as a learner so that we can change the pedagogy and embrace the shifts that the math framework is bringing to us. And then the next slide, I'll pass it to Manuel.
Thank you. And then just lastly, some foundational resources that we want to make sure that we bring to your attention, and that you have the links for these. Again, you can access the math framework through the CDE webpage. We encourage you to take a look at it. I just posted the links to these resources in the chat. These are great resources for you to be able to take a look at and learn from. The math framework is up on the CDE webpage. You can also take a look at the 2014 English Language Arts, English Language Development Framework. It's still a critical piece of guidance for our districts, and we hope that you continue to implement that. And then lastly, in just this year, the State Board of Education also adopted guidance for local adoptions of instructional materials. This is updated guidance that they updated. They have great resources in there. They link to critical guidance that was and rubrics that was provided by some partners like the English Learner Success Forum and the LMU Center for Equity for English Learners. So please take a look at that guidance. Just something that I want to elevate from the language there is that they really call for districts to put together review teams that incorporate expertise for multilingual learners. So that idea that we want to make sure that your expertise is at the table, that you're not just consulted as a nice to have, but you're consulted as an integral part of the process. And then in the next slide, you'll see some additional supporting resources from our coalition members. So the first one that I want to highlight is the criteria for the review of instructional materials for there to be success in addressing multilingual learners. This was created by the California Curriculum Collaborative, which is a partnership with Ed Reports, Ed Solutions, the English Learner Success Forum, and Unbound Ed, which was previously Pivot Learning. This is a great resource and a great thought piece for how you can create rubrics and review materials that center the needs of multilingual learners. There's also the criteria for selecting high quality instructional materials with considerations for multilingual learners that was created by the Center for Equity for English Learners, another great resource and tool for you to use. And then lastly, if you want to learn more about that San Leandro and what they talked about, there's a case study that the English Learner Success Forum developed that you can access as well and learn more about. And then, as Marta mentioned earlier in the slide, we are part of a high quality instructional materials learning partners coalition, and as part of that coalition, there is a definition that was created by all of the organizations last year that we want to share with all of you. This is a definition of high quality instructional materials that center the needs of multilingual learners. What we hope that you do is that as you start the process of adoptions in your districts, that you consider a definition for your own districts that might meet the needs of your diverse students, and you consider this definition as a thought piece and as a starting point for how you develop your own definition in your districts. You can also go to the webpage for this coalition and access additional resources. On the right of this slide, you see a QR code. So for those of you that want to get updates from each of the coalition members, including updates on what's happening with the state adoption process for recommended materials and additional webinar opportunities, resources, and training opportunities from Loyola Marymount University, at Trust West, or any of the organizations that are parts of this, members of this group, please go to that QR code and share your email address so that we can add you to the listserv, so that you can be in the loop and start getting updates on additional opportunities on this topic. And next, I'll hand it back to Veronica.
Well, thank you. It was delightful to start this conversation. Thank you to our panel again. And I'm sure that you have lots of questions. Maybe you have comments, things that you are still wondering about, or that you want to continue the conversation about. And so we want to invite you to join us for a virtual brown bag meeting. And so if you sign up to the HQIM contact list, that the link will be put in the chat, we will keep you informed. We'll send you information about the meeting, but we would love for you to meet some of the other members of the coalition. And we would love to hear some of the questions, some of the work that you are doing to elevate integrated English language development, and how to uplift the work that we are all doing. So with that, in the next slide, we want to say thank you so much for being here this evening. And we would appreciate your feedback. There is a QR code and also a link in the chat for your feedback. We would love to hear from you. And please sign up for the coalition contact list, and we will be in touch with you to share, like Manuel said, any events from our partner organizations, updates from the state about the adoption of the high quality instructional materials, and any updates about the math framework. So thank you very much for being here with us. And we hope that you have a great rest of your evening.